joining.
Hi, this is Karishma Tanna.
Hi, I'm Nushat Bharucha.
Catch this conversation on News 9.
Catch this conversation on News 9.
Catch me and this conversation on News 9.
Hi, this is Shahid Kapoor and catch this conversation on News 9.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
Good morning, you're watching News 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra, and on the show today, the big story. Will India finally get that trade deal with the United States? As Donald Trump has promised, he will release 7 letters later tonight, India time. Well, also on the show, Donald Trump yesterday said that 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals is on the anvil. The pharma stocks on the Indian markets will be in focus today. We will discuss that with Feroz Aziz. And also on the show, a 35 lakh rupee bag designed like an auto rickshaw. Is it worth your money? We'll bring you all that and more right here on Morning Brief at 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. First up, let's bring you all the headlines that we're tracking for you. US President Donald Trump to name at least 7 countries this evening, India time, with more expected later through the night, sparking speculation over new trade deals or tariffs. Will India be on that list of new trade deals announced by the US? Meanwhile, Trump announces 50% tariff on imported copper to boost US production, sending futures soaring over 10%. And it's not just copper. Donald Trump plans tariff on imported pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, warns of 200% duty after grace period of drugmakers. Trump warns BRICS nations of impending 10% tariff, targets India for staying in the bloc. He claims aims to hurt the US and weaken, or rather what he calls destroy, the US dollar. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been conferred Brazil's highest civilian honor for strengthening bilateral ties. India and Brazil signed 6 key agreements on security, digital transformation, renewable energy and agriculture, marking a major step in strategic cooperation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes a historic visit to Namibia, first by an Indian Prime Minister in nearly 3 decades. Talks focus on deepening ties, potential uranium exports and interest in Namibia's recent oil discoveries. The centre is all set to enforce a no-fuel policy from November 1st this year in Delhi and 5 NCR districts. End-of-life vehicles to be barred from refueling in bid to curb air pollution and phase out old vehicles. India holds 15% of global gold market as rising inflation and global trends drive demand. Gems and jewelry exports led by diamonds and gold jewelry, with FY25 exports at $25.7 billion. Can India sustain this momentum amid global volatility? We discuss on the show. Also on the show, Louis Vuitton unveils a 35 lakh rupee auto rickshaw inspired handbag from Spring-Summer 2026 collection. Is the price tag really worth the hype? We discuss. In a major development, US President Donald Trump has hinted at a major announcement coming on Wednesday that he will be naming at least 7 countries in the morning of 9 July US time in connection with trade, and with more countries expected to be revealed in the afternoon US time. Now, while details still remain unclear, Trump's message has sparked speculation whether this is a rollout of new trade deals or are tariff letters, more of those on the way. Remember, the timing of the announcement comes as Trump seeks to reinforce his America First trade stance, which was central to his first term. Remember, just yesterday night, India time, Trump had sent out tariff letters to 14 nations, with Japan and South Korea being the first recipients. The 14 countries were slapped with reciprocal tariffs ranging from 25% to 40% on their exports to the US. And US President Donald Trump also reaffirmed on Tuesday that his reciprocal tariffs will take effect on August 1st with no extensions. The European Union, Washington's largest bilateral trade partner, is racing to finalize a deal ahead of the deadline. Trump said an agreement with the bloc is nearly done and Brussels will receive a letter in the next 2 days. So far, only Britain and Vietnam have reached agreements with the US, with India reportedly next in line. Listen in.
The big money will start coming in on August 1st.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday reiterated that countries targeted by his so-called reciprocal tariffs will start paying on August 1st, and that there will be no extensions. This follows his announcement Monday of new higher tariffs on 14 countries.
I think it was made clear today by the letters that were sent out yesterday and today.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the U.S. could bring in more than $300 billion by the end of the year.
We will have taken in about $100 billion in tariff income thus far this year, and that's with the tariffs, the major tariffs not having started till the second quarter. So we could expect that could be well over $300 billion by the end of the year.
The announced duties include 25% on powerhouse Asian economies Japan and South Korea, who said on Tuesday they would try to negotiate with the U.S. to soften the impact. Japan's top trade negotiator Ryoshi Akazawa held a 40-minute phone call with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and sought concessions for Japan's automobile industry. The two agreed to actively continue talks. South Korea, for its part, said it planned to intensify trade talks over the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the European Union, the largest bilateral trade partner of the U.S., is aiming to strike a deal before August 1st. Trump said Tuesday he was close to finalizing an agreement with the bloc.
We're probably 2 days off from sending them a letter. We are talking to them. I just want you to know, a letter means a deal.
Only 2 deals have been struck so far, with Britain and Vietnam. Trump has also said a deal with India was close. The U.S. and China agreed to a trade framework in June, but with many of the details still unclear, traders and investors are watching to see if it unravels before a separate U.S.-imposed August 12th deadline. Trump said China has been very fair on its trade deal with the U.S., and that he has had a good relationship with the country lately and speaks with Chinese President Xi Jinping often. Economists have warned that tariffs could drive up prices and slow down growth, but uncertainty over the ultimate policies may end up being the biggest drag, as it could force businesses to postpone key decisions.
The US president has also announced a 50% tariff on imported copper that is vital to electric vehicles, defense equipment and power infrastructure. The news sent US copper futures soaring over 10%. Speaking at a White House cabinet meeting, Trump said the move aims to reduce dependence on foreign copper, but didn't specify when the tariffs will take effect.
Ones we did steel, as you know, they're 50%. We did aluminum, 50%. Lumber just came out.
Mention that's copper.
And we did cars. And now, today we're doing copper.
Copper and aluminum. What would that tariff be on? The section
I believe the tariff on copper, we're going to make it 50%.
50%.
And while the 50% tariff on copper is likely to hurt India, there is another item in the news which is likely to potentially hurt India even more, and that's the imposition of steep tariffs on imported pharmaceuticals as well as semiconductors. Now, speaking at that cabinet meeting, Trump said drug imports could face tariffs as high as 200%, though companies will be given up to 18 months to adjust. He warned that firms failing to localize production in the U.S. would face hefty penalties. Trump also hinted at more tariffs to come, calling chips and medicines big ones, but gave no timeline for when the measures would take effect. Listen in.
And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals. We're going to give people about a year and a half to come in, and after that they're going to be tariffed if they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%. we'll give them a certain period of time to get their act together. But they were all here. Now they all left. They went to other places because we allowed people that sat in this room allowed it to happen. And I don't allow it to happen. The people in this room don't allow it to happen. So we're going to be announcing pharmaceuticals, chips, and various couple of other things.
And skirting a direct question by a journalist on that trade deal with India that Trump had earlier said is very close to getting finalized. Trump did say that countries, including India, part of BRICS, could soon face a 10% tariff. Now, this is a direct warning to India. President Trump stated that a 10% tariff would certainly have to be paid by India if it remains part of BRICS, which he claimed was established to harm the United States and, in his words, destroy the US dollar. Listen in.
But then a couple days ago, you issued a new tariff threat to members of the BRICS countries for if they aligned with anti-American policies.
10% charge.
That would be India, Brazil.
That's right. They have to pay 10% if they're in BRICS. Because BRICS was set up to hurt us. BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar and take our dollar as the standard, take it off as the standard. And that's okay if they want to play that game, but I can play that game too. So anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge.
Is that immediate, sir? Or is
Yeah,
that
pretty
if
soon.
they engage in some behavior?
Well, if they're a member of BRICS, they're going to have to pay 10% tariff just for that one thing. And they won't be a member long. I thought BRICS was, I said this about a year ago, and it largely broke up. But, there are a couple that hang around, but I thought it largely broke up. BRICS is not, in my opinion, not a serious threat. But what they're trying to do is destroy the dollar so that another country can take over and be the standard. And we're not going to lose the standard.
So let's unpack now what is the likely impact on India with all the latest that we are hearing from the United States President. Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist at Nikore Associates, joining me this morning. Also Barnik Chitran Mehta, PE investor, managing partner, Chrysalis Equity Ventures, here with us on News 9. Mithali, let me begin by asking you a possibility of a trade deal, a mini trade deal being announced later tonight. That at least seems to be the hope. Technically, India has not missed the 9th July deadline as yet because it will be 9th July in the US only later at night. But even if we were to go ahead with a trade deal and get out of the ambit of that 26% tariff, we are still staring at a 10% baseline and potentially a 10% BRICS tariff, which is likely to come in. So 20% is unlikely to go anywhere, isn't it?
So I think, Karthik, at this point in time, we really can't comment on what the actual rates are going to be. Whether this 10% BRICS tariff is even going to be a reality or not is definitely unclear. We're in the wee hours. It's around 11:30 at night right now here in New York. And I can tell you that at this point in time, there's only one mood in this country, which is complete confusion when it comes to the Trump tariffs. Because, every day a new rate, a new commodity, a new set of countries is being targeted. And, nobody actually has any clue whether any of these tariffs are actually going to be enforced in reality. And if it's very clear in the circles in Washington as well, and I've been talking to a lot of analysts here in the US, nobody actually believes that any of these tariffs are going to come into force. And also, the deadline has been shifted to 1st of August. So I think at this point in time for India, the implications are very clear. We are the third country after the UK and Vietnam where, we've been able to negotiate at least a mini trade deal, which is basically a trade deal in principle is going to happen. We've been able to secure, what I'm hearing is that we've been able to secure a lot of exemptions, even for the pharmaceutical products and semiconductor products that may be manufactured in India. We're also hearing that, there's a lot of concessions that are being considered for electronics being manufactured in India. So honestly, these in principle agreements are taking place as part of the mini trade deal. But of course, we have to see what happens in the full-fledged trade deal, what the actual rates are going to be, and that will take some time.
Right. So we don't know what the actual rates, the actual actionable rates on India will be. But Barnik, what we do here now is that a 50% tariff on copper and potentially a 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals is likely to be next on the formal announcement agenda of President Donald Trump. both the sectors likely to have a major impact on the Indian economy?
Yeah, so let's start with metals. I think there is already a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, which were announced in April.
Yeah.
That has already affected Indian foundries and steel derivative exporters. I think the copper tariffs are next. I think this is part of the US strategy to have more metal production in the US, right? So let's see where this goes. I would be a little bit more careful about the pharmaceutical product tariffs, because even the president's announcement, he has mentioned that he'll give an 18-month to 24-month runway for people to import it. US is heavily dependent on pharmaceutical products. There is nothing which gets manufactured in the US. So I'm far more skeptical of that being part of any big tariff regime, particularly when it comes to big pharmaceutical product manufacturers like India or China. So again, I would be not too worried about the announcement of pharmaceutical. I think this is classic negotiation in the art of the deal style. Throw in a lot of threats, ensure that a lot of people on the table agree on the deal very quickly. But as you said, there are press reports that there will be a mini trade deal announced with a lot of the red lines drawn by India, particularly on agriculture and dairy exports, being kept out of the ambit of the mini trade deal. And once that comes in, that is a temporary pause from the 26% getting affected from August 1. It just buys India more time, probably till end of this year, to negotiate the final deal. But again, I'm not too unhappy or not too worried about the pharmaceutical tariffs yet, because I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
All right, no worry yet is the word coming in from Barnik. Another issue that Trump raised yesterday, yet again, Mithali, was the de-dollarization debate and the fact that Donald Trump believes that the BRICS nations are there to destroy the hegemony of the US dollar. In the foreseeable future, is that really a threat? Is that something which has the possibility of ever coming true, of other currencies trading, like the Russian President Vladimir Putin also said, trading in national currencies and trying to offset the importance of the US dollar?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that, this is what I find very interesting, I think, Karthik, about being here in the US is how little a lot of analysts are taking this. They're taking this with a lot of salt, not even a pinch, but like just a lot of salt. Because honestly, a lot of these things that the president is saying is actually serving the needs of his electorate, serving the needs of his political ratings to be boosted up. But in reality, we know that when it comes to the dollar being a reserve currency for the whole world, the dollar being the currency of choice for international trade, it's not going anywhere. It's a stable currency. It's been the currency, of trade for the longest time. And in fact, what is interesting is that we're seeing a lot of movements here in the US to actually sort of make the monetary policy more compliant and more pliant with President Trump's fiscal plans. And he's not very happy with the fact that, Jerome Powell is a, independent decision maker in his own right. He's really trying to control the decisions of the Federal Reserve and to manipulate the dollar in his own sort of way. That is something that is being observed by a number of analysts here in the US, and that is worrying. That is worrying the economic analysts here in the US. So therefore, I think at this point in time, for the international trading, international trading preferences, I don't see any move towards de-dollarization in any meaningful way, particularly when it comes to oil trade between the Middle East and, the Asian markets like India and China both. Right. So, all of these are really sentiments that are pleasing his electorate rather than any real threat to the dollar.
All right. Well, just sentiment and not real threat. Barnik, final question to you. The fact that the BRICS tariff, the 10% tariff that Trump is talking about, will be applicable on all BRICS nations, and that includes, among others, definitely India as well as China. So the point is that the 10% tariff, if and when it does get imposed, it will make both India and China pretty much as uncompetitive as each other. So is that really going to be in the overall China plus one shifting of manufacturing and the diversification of supply chains? Is India really going to lose out any more than China would?
Yeah, so let's unpack that a bit, right? Let's break it into three parts, right? How likely is the 10% BRICS tariff? I think the president responds very contextually to what's going around. I think a lot of the questions around BRICS is around the summit going on. The summit is already over. I don't assume it's going to be top of his mind going forward. So again, the likelihood of a 10% BRICS tariff, I would be very skeptical, right? Secondly, I think the de-dollarization, which the US is worried about, has already started in a way 5 years back when a lot of the trade deals or the oil deals happening between bilateral countries often tend to get denominated in non-dollar currencies. And the biggest harm to the US dollar is being caused by the US administration by its policies, both internally and on trade, where a lot of countries are realizing that the US dollar is no longer going to be a stable haven. So I think the impact of de-dollarization or impact on countries like BRICS on the importance of de-dollarization will be far less than what the US government is doing. So if you take a 20-30-year view, I think a lot of currency analysts expect the dollar to be far less important than it is today. Right. That trend is reasonably secular, has started 7-8 years back. It notably started with US sanctions, right, on Russia when US dollar assets were frozen. If you look at the recent rally in commodities over the last 3 years, that's actually a lot of money moving away from the US dollar to commodities. So I don't think neither BRICS nor any threats of tariffs on BRICS is going to make an impact. Right. So again, not too worried about it. And then again, put into the China plus one philosophy, I think the 10% BRICS tariff is more directed towards China than India. Though the noise is about India, again, I'd be very skeptical. That being said, if you look at the longer term US policy, and if you look at policy beyond the current administration, I think there's an increasing realization in Washington circles that it's better to friendshore than to offshore. And certain labor-intensive industries will never come back to the US. It's better that they are offshore to friends and not adversaries like China. So I really believe that there will be no policy which puts India at a far more disadvantage to China, particularly when it comes to labor-intensive manufacturing industries. And remember, the US consumer loves cheap products, right? Of course. It's not going to be anytime soon that they're going to buy a $3,000 iPhone. I think like last time in 2017, iPhones were exempt from tariffs in China. I think the electronics exemptions to India are probably targeted at iPhones. So again, I'm not too skeptical. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, I see opportunities for India in this flux, and we should grab this opportunity with both hands and both legs if possible.
Well, and I think that is exactly what the endeavor of Indian negotiators also seems to be. But let's see what comes out of that mini trade deal later tonight, as we are informed is likely to be the time when we will hear something more concrete. But Barnik, Mitali, thank you so much for your time this morning. And with that, we will slip into a short break. But coming up on the other side, with the announcement of a potential 200% tariff on the pharmaceutical sector, we will take a look at pharma stocks this morning. We will have Feroz Aziz, joint CEO of Anand Rathi, joining us on the other side of the break.
This is the drive of your dreams. Introducing the all-new Skoda Kailak. Own your dream.
Skoda.
ये गोल्डन का एक तेरे लिए मंगाओ मेरे नए म्यूजिक गॉगल्स मंगाओ क्या
ये नई गाड़ी कप होल्डर है ठोकी भी रख सकते हैं म्यूजिक भी
सेविंग्स की विद्या तो कोई तुझसे सीखे
कुछ बड़ा बनाना है तो पहले बचाओ फेडरल बैंक से रिश्ता बनाओ
Every brand tells a story. And they are the storytellers. The Sutradhars. They present a brand with band, baja and barat to you. They are the Brandwalas.
back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. Let's bring you a mood check on the markets. Let's begin with Asia. And one thing that we are now noticing as a trend is that the more we hear about tariffs, the less we see the impact on markets. And that seems to be the case definitely with South Korea. Despite the 25% tariff, the KOSPI index was up more than 1.25% in trade today. And even this morning, starting with 0.5% in gains. Rest of the Asia also seems fairly okay, more or less on a flattish tone, barring Hang Seng, which is down about 0.8% or so in trade. The mood on the Indian markets is also more or less flat, albeit a little bit on the negative side. The Nifty 50 is well below the 25,500 mark. Well, actually just 10 points short of the 25,500 mark. The Sensex struggling to reclaim the 83,600 odd levels, and the action in the small cap and the mid cap space is also a little mixed. Volatility, on the other hand, is down by almost 1% as compared to yesterday around this time, now down to about 12.09 on the VIX index. Let's look at the Nifty 50 heat map and see where is the heat coming from and where is a breath of relief coming from. Well, as expected, we are seeing, in fact, the banking stocks are a little bit under pressure this morning. So are the IT stocks, which have a direct bearing on what we see, the knock-on effect from the US markets. And US markets, remember, closed a little bit in the negative yesterday after Donald Trump spoke to his cabinet and to the media and announced this fresh wave of tariffs which are likely to come in. But what seems to be a surprise this morning are the pharma stocks, both Cipla as well as Sun Pharma. Despite the news of 200% tariff kicking in soon, those stocks seem to be in the green this morning. Let's try and unpack that. We have Feroz Aziz, joint CEO of Anand Rathi Wealth, joining us this morning. Feroz, good morning. First, help us unpack the mood of the market. IT stocks, as expected, reeling under a little bit of pressure this morning. But beyond that, it doesn't really seem to be a stress point for the markets that tariffs will be announced on copper as well as on pharma. So first up, the mood on the Wall Street this morning.
Good morning, Karthik. I think the mood is reasonably subdued. It's reasonably lackluster. It is sideways, and that you see in this full expiry of this first expiry of July. That's largely because on 1st of July, the derivative circular has come into effect, where we move from notional values of options and limits being set on notional values to delta values, which happened on 1st of July. So the entire derivative market is trying to recalibrate. Now, like, for example, if I'm a derivative trader, I'm going to recalibrate all my positions from notional value and try and devise a strategy which actually brings in agility to the new found methods of doing options market. So I personally think you will see sideways movement, and that's largely because of the 1st July, and that's why you see this expiry tomorrow.
All right. So that seems to be the larger context on why we are seeing the lackluster market. But I'm surprised, Feroz, this morning that despite Donald Trump's announcement of 200% tariff coming on pharmaceuticals, though he's given an 18-month window for them to localize manufacturing in the US, but all pharma stocks seem to be in the green territory this morning, and that's fairly surprising because yesterday we had seen that this particular sector was reeling under a lot of pain. We had stocks like Dr. Reddy's which were down more than 2%, and this morning there is some gain. In fact, now a flattish tone that we are seeing on Dr. Reddy's. Similarly, Sun Pharma, Cipla, Mankind, Lupin, all registering some gains this morning. What is driving the optimism in the pharma sector this morning?
Karthik, if I look at it from a short-term standpoint and then medium-term standpoint, first let me start with the medium-term standpoint. Last year, the earnings of pharma were just stupendous, right? It has 20 stocks in Nifty Pharma, 3.2% weight in Nifty, 4.6% weight in NSE Nifty 500, and 46% is the free float of this index. So it's a low free float index. 46% is one of the lowest free floats in any of the sectors.
Okay.
What has happened? And it has given a growth of almost, if I remember right, 673 rupees was the earnings on Nifty Pharma, which implied a 28.5% growth in earnings last year, which I think is something which didn't pan out in prices. Why didn't that pan out in prices? Because there are different kinds of owners of a stock or a sector at least. What happens is the frothy FIIs sell at the drop of a hat, especially those hedge funds have already sold pharma. So you see very little frothy ownership in this sector. So any sector which has very low frothy ownership will do contrary to what the news says. Because news वाले ने तो बेच दिया है पहले से. So identifying what is the froth in ownership in each sector helps us decipher non-palatable directional movements in sectors. The reason why pharma is positive is because जिसने बेचना था वो बेच चुका, frothy ownership खत्म हो चुका.
So yesterday was the frothy ownership that gave way to the stocks tanking, and this morning is the serious investors who you believe are still plugged into those stocks. So for somebody who is a long-term investor, a retail investor looking at the long-term story, invested in pharma stocks, what should their strategy be given the news that 200% tariff is likely to hit those stocks?
See, I would take that with a pinch of salt because the pharmaceutical industry in the US, which is practically government funded, 90% government funded there, they cannot expect that kind of inflation. If they are actually penalizing us, they're indirectly penalizing their own citizens. So I don't think...
And that's true for tariffs of all kinds, isn't it, Feroz? And that seems to be perhaps one of the reasons why we are seeing even the South Korean and the Japanese main indices not really reeling under any pressure ever since that 25% tariff came in.
Absolutely. You're so right, Karthik. It's like inflation is a big challenge for the US. They're not able to do any quantitative easings looking at inflation. So they are trying to see how they can up the 2.5% total tariff number percentage. That's the US imports. 2.5% is what they have. And if they could move it to 7-8%, that will almost mean $700 billion. That's what they're trying to push and pull and get to. And there are some sectors which are largely government funded. That's where their liberalness in terms of tariffs will show up over a period of time. So I think because everybody who's negotiating knows that pharmaceutical is one space where you can't have very heavy tariffs because the government's expenditure is not easy because it's aging population. US has $336 trillion. So coming back to the point which you made, that's precisely why the bluff has been called that it's not going to be such stark tariff numbers. At the end of it, the average tariff of US imports will move from 2.6% to about 6-7%. Is what is my guess.
All right. And that could be the reason why we also heard Treasury Scott Bessent yesterday say that the $100 billion in tariff could at best go up to about $200 billion and perhaps nothing more than that. So the 2.5, 2.7 effective rate could, like you're saying, just about double to maybe about 6% or so. But another important sector in news this morning happens to be the metal sector. Again, 50% tariff on copper. Earlier, we only heard from Donald Trump that it's going to be steel and aluminium, and now copper has also been added, and we are seeing some impact of that on the metal stocks this morning. Vedanta is down about 1%, and so is the case in fact with Tata Steel, which is down more than about 1% or so. So no froth in this sector, can we assume that? And this is something, the movement on the charts is something that we are seeing purely on the basis of news that came out last night, Feroz?
Yes, Karthik, I think, when it comes to metals, especially copper 50%, which has been spoken about, of course, I again don't take that too seriously, but I think we are the third largest exporter of copper after Saudi being second, if I'm not wrong, to the US. So I think this is one sector. Metal sectors are high beta sectors. High beta sectors have lower fundamental owners and more frothy owners. That's why they are high beta. They move on news. So that's why they throw up a relative risk more than Nifty. So I would call metal as a high beta sector. In turn, fluid ownership is larger in this sector, and free floats are larger. Free floats are lower. So I think this will certainly have some short-term impact on the metal stocks, which have had a reasonable good run from a short-term and medium-term perspective as well.
All right, Feroz. And finally, I want to look at the IT sector also, which has a direct sort of implication on inflation data that comes from the US. So the fact that tariffs are going to at some point lead to inflation. How much inflation? We don't know. How the US Fed Reserve is going to react, to inflation data, especially because end of the month is when the FOMC is likely to convene, 29th and 30th of July. Unlikely that they will go ahead with a rate cut this time despite Donald Trump's pressure. But the point being that inflation is likely to be imported into the US, and a direct bearing of that is likely to be on India's IT sector. And of course, this also in the context of TCS likely to announce its results tomorrow and also give guidance for the next quarter and rest of the year. How do you feel the IT sector is poised for, let's say, the rest of the year ahead?
Of course, the surprise I think is priced in the IT sector because that's the obvious collateral damage. like you rightly correlated, the US inflation and in turn some degree of impact on the Indian IT sector. Since IT sector is here in India is a service sector, not a product sector, servicing the US. And I personally think IT sector has 10 stocks in Nifty IT. I personally think that the weightages of Nifty in IT is 11%. What I'm trying to get to is in NSE 500, we have about 8.3%. Any sector which has a larger weightage in Nifty and lesser weightage in NSE 500 implies that they will get the benefit in the long run of index fund investings in India.
All right.
So that's why I think long-term demand and supply IT will do well. From an earnings standpoint, they delivered 10.1%. My earnings estimate for IT, surprisingly, I'm sure contrary to the most belief, will be about 15-16% on the PAT number. Okay. And if that panned out, I think it will be a resilient sector in spite of the uncertainty which the US throws up for the sector directly.
All right, Feroz Aziz, as always, a pleasure having you right here on Newsline. Thank you for all those inputs. Moving on now, India's gold prices are being driven by a mix of global market trends, dollar strength, import duties and rising inflation, which continues to drive demand. According to a report, India holds 15% share of the world's $23 trillion gold market, with central banks globally buying up $84 billion worth in 2024 alone. Meanwhile, in the gems and jewelry sector, diamonds make up nearly 47% of India's exports, followed by gold jewelry at about 39%. The US and the UAE remain India's top export destinations, as overall exports stood at $25.7 billion in February 2025. Joining us this morning is Amit Modak, the CEO and Director of P.N. Gutgill & Sons. Amit, good morning. Pleasure having you here on News 9. Help us unpack how is gold likely to react now, given that there is somewhat a little more clarity, though the ambiguity hasn't gone away, but there's some more clarity on the way ahead on tariffs. So given the context of tariffs, how do you expect gold to move from here?
Present US president contest, we cannot say any clarity or anything, because every day he used to issue new statement. Right now also he has issued that some countries will pay a higher tariff, but it will be applicable from 1st August, and still he is saying that in between, if they negotiate, he will reconsider. So reconsidering is going to continue, and that uncertainty is going to continue. Moreover, the main reason for this gold rally or the silver rally is not only the tariff. There are a number of other factors which are affecting. One most important factor is unemployment and inflation, which is there everywhere in the world. Jobs are getting reduced day by day, and inflation is going up day by day. Right. And it is beyond the control of any of the government. It's not only the US or not only the India or any specific country, it is a worldwide scenario. Right. So that is a main factor which is driving this gold, because uncertainty in the currency, higher inflation, lower employment, all these factors are always drive the gold prices. And now the central banks are also joined for driving these gold prices.
That's right.
If we consider last 8 or 10 years, their buying spree, and last 2 years, or even the first quarter of or second quarter of this calendar year, we are looking at a huge increase is there of their buying of the gold as a safe asset. Right. Because overall their forex reserves have gone up to the tune of 20%.
That's right.
As compared to the other assets, like it may be the FX or the treasuries or the bonds of the foreign currency bonds and all these things. So all central banks are interested in gold, except the US and German central bank.
That's right. Mr. Modak, I also want to understand that gems and jewelry export is a large volume of India's overall exports. And we've seen this sector getting hit even when we saw the slowdown in the Chinese economy in the immediate aftermath of the COVID and the China +1 lockdown policy being removed. But overall, in the context of inflation being imported into the US, Chinese economy yet to pick up to its pre-COVID levels, is India's gems and jewelry sector, the export part of it, going to continue to be under pressure for the foreseeable future?
It will be remaining under pressure, because as gold prices goes up, ultimately that jewelry price also goes up for per unit or the per item. And discretionary purchase is there always. The jewelry is a discretionary purchase. If you see the prices are going up in the gold, but exports are going down in the gold and jewelry, because there is a more interest for the gold as an investment rather than the jewelry. We in India always see that people are more and more buying jewelry rather than the investment gold. In foreign countries, especially US, they are more inclined towards the investment. For gold, they are considering it as an investment asset.
Right.
But as prices started going up, they are reducing their jewelry fancy, and they are also interested in investing in the gold as an investment asset.
All right.
And that export downward definitely will affect the India, because it was a major export in the total export portion of the country.
Right.
But tariff is not the only concern for them, as they have already established their base when the tariff discussion started almost 8 months ago.
Right.
They already shifted their production base and manufacturing base or the headquarters to the Arabian countries or the Bahrain countries from where they can export. They have shifted it, and so for them, those companies as such, there is no damage.
All right, Mr. Modak, thank you for your perspective on that. Let's leave it at that for now, but pleasure having you here on News 9. And moving on now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a landmark visit to Namibia, making the final leg of his 5-nation tour and the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the African nation in nearly 3 decades. The visit is expected to further deepen ties between India and Namibia. Speaking on the Prime Minister's visit, High Commissioner of India to Namibia, Rahul Srivastava, said that India is looking at exporting uranium from the African country, and also that its recent oil discoveries are of great interest to New Delhi. Listen in to what Rahul Srivastava said.
So the Prime Minister visit happens after a long gap of 27 years. We have a long range of things that we want to discuss, primarily about trade and investment. We are interested in critical minerals in Namibia. Some of our PSUs would want to invest here. We are looking at export of uranium from Namibia to India, and there have been recent oil and gas discoveries in Namibia. That is also an area of interest. We will be discussing about defense cooperation, because Namibia wants to procure defense items from India, and capacity building is one of the important pillars of India-Namibia relations.
And during his stay in the capital window, Prime Minister Modi will hold bilateral talks with the Namibian president and address a joint sitting of Namibia's parliament. Bilateral trade between the two nations stood at around 814 million in the year 2023-24, with Indian exports accounting for over half that figure. A key highlight of the visit will be signing of a technology agreement enabling UPI and unified payment interoperability between the two countries. The Centre's Air Quality Commission has amended its earlier order to clamp down on pollution caused by vehicles. Now, starting November 1st this year, the no-fuel policy will be enforced in Delhi and 5 surrounding NCR districts of Gurugram, Faridabad, Ghaziabad, Gautam Budh Nagar, that's Noida, as well as Sonipat. The decision was taken after a meeting between Commission of Air Quality Management and the Environment Secretary, where the earlier order was amended. Now, under the policy, end-of-life vehicles will not be allowed to refuel at fuel stations. The aim is to phase out such vehicles from the roads and eventually curb air pollution. The CAQM clarified that this move is not a rollback but a necessary delay to help overcome technical and logistical hurdles. The extension gives state governments and enforcement agencies time to fully prepare for the implementation. Now, once enforced, fuel stations in the notified regions will deny petrol or diesel to old vehicles, and legal action may follow if the rule is violated. Listen to Delhi's Chief Minister Rekha Gupta.
एक तकलीफ थी जनता की जो पिछली सरकारों ने कभी समझी नहीं थी, लगातार उसको इग्नोर करते हुए ना तो उन्होंने कभी पॉल्यूशन पे काम किया और ना ही पॉलिसी पे काम किया। जब ये विषय CAQM ने तय किया और जिसमें माननीय न्यायालय का भी आदेश इसमें शामिल था, तो हमने दिल्ली की जनता का तकलीफ उनके सामने रखी थी कि इस तरीके से दिल्ली की जनता को साथ अन्याय नहीं होना चाहिए और हमारी बात को संज्ञान लेते हुए उन्होंने जिस प्रकार से 1 नवंबर 2025 तक इस पूरे आदेश को टाला है, मैं समझती हूँ कि ये अच्छा कदम है और इस बीच में हमें जो समय मिलेगा इसकी हम और तैयारी करते हुए जनता को बेहतर रिलीफ देने के लिए काम करेंगे और सरकार लगातार जनता के हित में, जनता के लिए और जनता के साथ खड़ी है।
All right, let's slip into a short break, but before that, other stories from around the world that we're tracking for you. US President Donald Trump says he will name at least 7 countries on Wednesday as part of a sweeping trade move, with more nations expected to be added later in the day. Trump reaffirms reciprocal tariffs will take effect from August 1st with no extensions. European Union rushes to close deal in the next 2 days. 50% tariff on imported copper, a key input for EVs, defense and energy, has sent US copper futures surging more than 10% on the news. Trump also announces a new tariff on imported pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, with drug importers now facing duties likely as high as 200%, but will have 18 months to comply. No backing down on the BRICS tariff. 10% tariff on BRICS nations is likely to come in. Trump says there will be no relief on countries which are part of the BRICS union. Citing civilian casualties in Ukraine, US President Donald Trump says he is not happy with Russian President Vladimir Putin and is weighing new sanctions against Moscow. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa pushes back against a 30% US tariff, calling it unfair and based on a flawed understanding of trade flows. Goldman Sachs appoints former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as a senior global advisor, adding political clout amid rising regulatory and geopolitical risks. And finally, French fashion giant Louis Vuitton stirs buzz with a new 35 lakh rupee handbag modeled after India's iconic auto rickshaw. But is it really worth your money? We'll discuss. All these stories on the other side of the break. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
Light, camera, and action. Kick back, relax, grab your favorite snack because News 9 is here with your weekend dose of entertainment. It's time to take a deeper dive into the buzzworthy happenings of the entertainment world. From celebrity gossips to exclusive conversations, from nostalgic moments to News 9's pick of the week, don't worry, we've got you covered here. And I hope you've grabbed your popcorn by now because News 9's page 3 is here to serve you everything that we call entertainment. So do stay tuned every Saturday and Sunday, 2:30 p.m.
Welcome back, and now on to a story which has literally blown the internet, but we discuss, is it really worth its price? Well, French fashion house Louis Vuitton is making waves with the latest statement piece, a luxury handbag modeled after India's iconic auto rickshaw, priced at a staggering 35 lakh rupees. The bold design, part of the brand's spring-summer 2026 menswear collection, wasn't shown on the runway but surfaced during a re-see session. It gained traction after fashion commentator Diyat Pratha posted it on Instagram, setting off a flood of online reactions. Lloyd Matthias, angel investor and commentator, joins me this morning. Lloyd, good morning. 35 lakh rupees for not even a three-wheeler, but just a little bag that looks like one. Is it worth anybody's money?
Good morning, Karthik. I think interesting move. Primarily, I would say a lot of global luxury brands work off specific themes. And clearly in this case, or at least in the recent past, working off what you can call a local aesthetic or a vernacular aesthetic, if I could say, I think is something that some of these brands have picked up. Just a couple of weeks back, of course, we saw that Prada had kind of premiered the Kolhapuri chappal without any acknowledgement, which they subsequently did. And I think this is another of that example. I think using something intrinsically local and premiering it on a global stage. Though at one level, I do believe that some of the outrage is a little unjustified. But I do expect that some of these global brands, when they pick up local themes and pick up something entirely local, which is, a common man uses for his daily life, I think they should nod in acknowledgement and certainly should credit the fact that the idea has been inspired. I think taking it to a global stage, in a sense, gives it a much larger audience. And in a way points to the fact that a lot of our local traditions and artisans haven't been given a global stage, which to my mind is a weakness of what we as a country have done. We've not been able to take some of these beautifully crafted, unique items and premiere them globally. The fact that some global brands are doing it, I think in a sense makes up or points to an adequate, a weakness on our front.
All right, but Lloyd, simple question to you. If you had 35 lakh rupees to spare, is this one of the items that you would go and shop?
Well, not really my cup of tea. But like I said, comparing the pricing of some of these luxury brands with the cost of manufacture, or taking from the inspiration, saying that an auto rickshaw on the road costs a fraction of that cost, I think is a slightly skewed way of looking at it. I think part of the aura of a global premier luxury brand is, if I could call it that, exorbitant pricing. The fact that you take something, chisel it, give it a kind of a certain look, and then price it disproportionately, I think in a sense adds to its so-called appeal, at least among a certain set. I think you have to concede that. To expect cost-plus pricing, I think, is completely irrational.
All right, we are running out of time, but I can't let you go without asking one more question, and this is a larger industry question, Lloyd, and this comes from the fact that is there now time for India to go ahead and have those patents filed and if required, perhaps, own some copyright on this design and perhaps make money out of it? Because if you have Indian-made designs, Indian-made products being sold at exorbitant prices, should India get its share of the pie by just virtue of having designed it?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot that we have to do in terms of tightening up IP. I know a lot of these products have GI, specifically the Kolhapuri chappal and such like, but even the GI implementation depends on the fact that whether we have local trade agreements with respective countries. So just GI does not give you a global proprietary use, or anyone who uses a product that, or recreates a product with the GI is obliged to pay you a fee. So I think it points to the fact that India has to tighten up a lot of its IP. I think a lot of Indian brands need to work with local artisans and take these designs and, I wouldn't say exploit them, but I think give them a global audience before international brands chance upon the opportunity. And really what this particular incident is doing is really pointing at the fact that it's a missed opportunity. And there will be loads of other local Indian products, a lot of our saris, a lot of our local ethnic wear that is going to be premiered if Indians don't start doing it themselves.
All right, Lloyd Matthias, thank you so much for your input on this story. Lovely having you here on News 9. And moving on now, Apple has announced Sabid Khan, the company's long-time Senior Vice President of Operations. He'll now take over as Chief Operations Officer later this month. He succeeds Jeff Williams, a nearly 30-year veteran of Apple, who will continue overseeing design and health initiatives until his retirement later this year. Now, Khan, an Indian origin executive, has been instrumental in building and managing Apple's vast global supply chain since 1995. And the co-founder of Twitter, now renamed X after Elon Musk bought it, well, Jack Dorsey has unveiled BitChat, a new peer-to-peer messaging app that works, well, without the internet. The iPhone-only app currently in testing phase is designed to send encrypted messages over Bluetooth low-energy mesh networks without relying on servers or mobile networks. The privacy-first tool could prove essential during network blackouts or in regions with restricted internet access. And that's all we have for you on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. Thank you so much for watching, but news continues right here on News 9 after this break. Stay tuned.
कहाँ खोया रहता है भाई? हमेशा मोबाइल में घुसा रहता है। आपकी महबूबा देख रहा हूँ। ये सब क्या है भैया? हाँ? क्या बाइक थी यार? रिंच एकदम। हाँ? बाइकर बनने का सपना जो था, फिर ये डुगडुगी गई कहाँ? पापा के साथ साथ सारे सपने भी चले गए। अब तो बस अपने गैराज में बैठा लोगों की डुगडुगी ठीक करता रहता हूँ। और अपने बच्चों के सपनों के साथ ऐसा कुछ नहीं होने देना। वो कैसे? पहले से लाइफ इंश्योरेंस का टर्म प्लान ले रखा है। बड़े भैया,
सपनों को रखो सुरक्षित टर्म प्लान के साथ। सबसे पहले लाइफ इंश्योरेंस।
A deep dive into what matters to you the most. Angles you won't find anywhere else. News that impacts your life.
Sir, try berry pulao. Too good. Good, no?
Hey, why are you giving him such looks? Ignore tips and use your own mind before you order. Lots of people give unsolicited stock tips. It can be dangerous. Study the company and the risk associated. Invest only after analyzing.